At 34, Mara Ellison had been evicted from a roadside motel because she couldn't afford one more night. She had a failing car, a few bags of clothes, and Scout, the dog, sleeping beside her in the passenger seat. Then a lawyer called with an inheritance nobody else wanted. A ruined mountain inn in Colorado transferred to her for just $10. The roof leaked, the pipes were freezing, and a blizzard was moving in. When locals heard Mara planned to stay, some laughed. One man told her she'd be lucky if the place survived the winter. But Mara had nowhere else to go. 3 nights later, as snow buried the road outside, Scout began scratching furiously at the wall behind the old pantry. Mara pulled away a loose board and felt cold air coming from somewhere that shouldn't exist. Behind the wall was a narrow door, and beyond that door, she found something that would change everything she believed about the inn and about her own past. But before we open that door, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it there right now? I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are. And if you enjoy stories about forgotten places, hidden histories, and second chances, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. Now, let's go back to the night Mara had nowhere left to sleep. The knock came at 7:17 in the morning. 3 sharp raps that Mara Ellison had been expecting since before sunrise. Scout lifted his head from the motel carpet and looked toward the door. "It's okay," Mara whispered, although neither of them believed it. She checked her banking app one last time. The number had not changed overnight. She had enough for gas and a little food, but not enough for another night at the roadside motel outside Denver. The manager knocked again. Mara opened the door halfway. Cold November air slipped into the room. "Checkout was 7. He said, "I know. I was wondering if I could have until this afternoon. I can pay part of tonight now, and the rest, I can't do partial payments." His voice wasn't cruel, which somehow made it worse. "I need the room cleared." Mara swallowed. "Just until noon." He shook his head. "I'm sorry." She closed the door and stood with her hand on the lock. Scout pressed against her leg. "Well," she said, forcing brightness into her voice, "looks like we're moving on." She packed quickly because packing slowly would make it feel like an eviction. 2 bags of clothes, Scout's food, his water bowl, her mother's old sweater, and the folder containing bills she had stopped opening. Months of caring for her mother. Then the funeral. Then losing work had reduced Mara's life to what fit inside a failing sedan. 10 minutes later, she carried the last bag outside. The manager watched from the office window. Mara avoided his eyes. Scout climbed into the passenger seat, circled twice, and settled beside her. She turned the key. The engine hesitated before starting. The fuel gauge hovered near empty. "Luxury accommodations tonight," she told Scout. "Front seats and everything." Her phone showed 9% battery. Mara plugged it into a charger that only worked when the cable was bent against the dashboard. A notification appeared. One unheard voicemail, left the previous afternoon by a number she didn't recognize. She almost deleted it instead. She pressed play. "Ms. Mara Ellison, this is regarding the estate of Helen Ellison. Please contact our office in Silver Pine, Colorado as soon as possible. There is a property matter requiring your attention." Mara replayed it. Helen. Her mother's older relative, distant enough that Mara had not seen her in years. She remembered Christmas cards in careful handwriting and little else. She called the number. A man answered and confirmed Helen had died. Mara stared through the windshield at the faded motel sign while he explained that Helen had left her a property in Silver Pine. "What kind of property?" Mara asked. Papers shifted on the other end. "The Briarwood Inn." Mara almost laughed. An inn? A former inn? That distinction landed heavily. He explained that Briarwood had been closed for years. The transfer also required a symbolic purchase payment specified in Helen's arrangements. How much? Mara asked, already imagining a figure she couldn't afford. $10. She looked at Scout. $10 was absurdly small, yet right now it mattered. It was food. It was gas. It was money she might need if the car failed, and after I pay that, it's mine. Subject to completing the paperwork. Yes. Mara looked back at the motel room she had just been forced to leave. She had nowhere to sleep tonight. Somewhere in the Colorado mountains stood a building that, ruined or not, had doors and a roof. Maybe that was enough. I'll come, she said, today, if the car makes it. There was a brief silence. All right, but before you drive up there, Ms. Ellison, you should know nobody has lived at Briarwood in years. By early afternoon, the crowded edges of Denver had fallen behind Mara, replaced by narrow roads climbing into the mountains. She drove carefully, watching the fuel gauge almost as often as the road. Scout sat upright beside her as snow appeared in patches beneath the pines. Silver Pine was smaller than Mara expected. A main street, a diner, a library, a few old storefronts, and mountains rising behind everything. At the lawyer's office. She signed where she was told and placed a $10 bill on the desk. It felt ridiculous to hesitate before letting it go, but she did. $10 mattered when every dollar had a job. In return, she received a thick set of documents, 2 old brass keys, and a sealed envelope with her name written across it. Hello. Left that specifically for you, the lawyer said. Mara tucked it into her coat without opening it. Less than an hour later, she turned onto a mountain road leading away from town. The pavement narrowed, then became rough beneath her tires. Finally, through the trees, she saw a weathered wooden sign hanging crookedly from 2 posts. Briarwood Inn. The building beyond it was larger than she had imagined and in far worse condition. 3 stories of dark timber and faded stone stood against the mountainside. Several windows were boarded over. Part of the gutter hung loose. A section of roof sagged beneath old snow. Former inn, Mara murmured. Definitely former. Scout whined softly. A pickup truck was parked near the entrance. An older man in a heavy canvas jacket stepped down from the porch as Mara approached. Mara Ellison. Yes, Elias Boone. He shook her hand. His grip was rough and warm. Law office asked me to check the place before you arrived. He looked at her sedan, then at the bags visible through the rear window. His expression changed slightly, but he asked nothing. Inside, the lobby smelled of dust, damp wood, and cold stone. Sheets covered old furniture. A broad staircase disappeared into darkness. Mara tried a light switch. Nothing happened. Elias pointed toward an electrical panel. Power's unreliable. Water needs checking before you trust it. Couple windows upstairs are broken. Roof's worse on the west side. Mara stared upward. Anything good, Elias considered that? Foundation still standing. She gave him a tired look. Comforting. He didn't smile. You didn't inherit an inn. You inherited a winter problem. He showed her a weather alert on his phone. A major storm system was moving toward the mountains. Heavy snow was expected within days, possibly sooner at higher elevations. Mara's stomach tightened. Before she could ask what repairs mattered most, tires crunched outside. A clean, dark SUV stopped beside her sedan. The man who entered introduced himself as Cal Mercer. He wore polished boots that looked strangely untouched by the mud outside. I manage properties around Silver Pine, he explained. I heard Briarwood had a new owner. His eyes traveled around the lobby. I also know what this place will cost you. He offered to buy the property immediately. The number he named was enough to repair Mara's car, pay several months of rent somewhere cheap, and give her room to breathe. For several seconds, she imagined accepting. No leaking roof, no mountain road, no blizzard, no humiliation if she failed again. "Think about it," Cal said. "Winter doesn't get cheaper up here." After he left, Elias prepared to go before dark. "You staying?" he asked. Mara looked toward her car. Sleeping there had been her plan only that morning. Now she owned an entire building, however broken it was. "One night," she said. "Then I'll decide." Elias left her a flashlight and told her which downstairs room had the safest ceiling. Once his truck disappeared, the silence became enormous. Mara opened Helen's envelope beside the dusty front desk. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Before you decide what Briarwood is worth, learn what it was." That was all. Not exactly instructions. Mara told Scout. She found blankets in her car, ate crackers for dinner, and settled into a downstairs room while darkness swallowed the windows. The building creaked whenever the wind moved through it. Scout stayed restless. Near midnight, he suddenly stood and walked into the hallway. Scout, he continued toward the old pantry behind the kitchen. Mara followed with the flashlight. The dog stopped before shelves built against the back wall. His ears rose. A low growl formed in his throat. Then he began scratching at the boards. "Hey, stop!" Mara pulled him back, but Scout returned immediately. Pawing harder, she aimed the flashlight along the wall. Nothing moved. No animal appeared. She placed her palm against the wood, expecting to feel only cold boards. Instead, a thin stream of icy air touched her fingers. Mara froze. The pantry was inside the building. There should have been another room beyond this wall, not the outdoors. She moved her hand slowly along the boards until she felt the draft again. Scout stared at the same spot. Somewhere on the other side of that wall, cold air was moving through a space that should not have existed. Morning brought enough gray light for Mara to convince herself the draft behind the pantry wall had a reasonable explanation. An old vent, perhaps, or a gap leading into some forgotten service space. Scout was less willing to dismiss it. The moment Mara opened the pantry, he went directly to the same section of wall and sniffed along the floorboards. "You already proved your point," she told him. She called Elias before her phone battery dropped any lower. He arrived 40 minutes later, carrying a toolbox and a small portable work light. When Mara showed him the wall, he frowned. "Pantry always this shallow?" she asked. Elias stepped into the hallway, studied the surrounding rooms, then returned and measured the distance with his boots. No, not unless I remember this place wrong." He tapped the paneling with his knuckles. One section sounded solid. Farther along, the sound became hollow. Mara felt a small pulse of excitement despite the cold. "So there's space behind it." "Looks that way." Elias examined the shelves. These were added later. He pointed to screw heads buried beneath layers of paint. Wood's newer than the wall around it. They removed the shelves carefully, setting warped boards on the pantry floor. The work took longer than Mara expected because several screws had rusted in place. Halfway through, the portable light dimmed. "Battery," Elias said. "Story of this building." The inn's electricity had returned briefly that morning, then failed again before Mara could charge her phone. Worse, when she tested the kitchen faucet, only a weak trickle came out before stopping entirely. Elias warned that part of the plumbing might already be frozen. Every discovery seemed to come with a repair bill Mara couldn't pay. She rubbed her cold hands together. Maybe Cal was right. Elias glanced at her. About winter getting expensive. Those aren't the same thing. Mara looked at him. but he had already returned to the shelf when the last section came free. Scout immediately pushed his nose toward the exposed baseboard. He scratched once, then began working at a narrow gap. Mara crouched beside him. A line in the paneling ran vertically from floor to shoulder height. Elias! He aimed the flashlight at it. There was no visible handle, only boards painted to match the surrounding wall. Mara slid a screwdriver into the gap near the floor. The wood resisted. She pushed harder. Something cracked, and a thin strip pulled outward. Cold air rushed across her fingers. "There it is," she whispered. Elias helped pry away another board. Behind it appeared the edge of a narrow wooden door. Someone had covered it deliberately. Mara's heartbeat quickened. Why hide a door? Elias shook his hand. Only one way to find out. The old latch had no lock, but paint and age held it shut. Mara pulled while Elias worked the edge with a flat bar. Suddenly the seal broke. The door opened inward with a groan. Dust moved through their flashlight beams. Beyond it was a small, windowless room. Mara stood still on the threshold. A narrow desk rested against one wall. Metal filing cabinets lined another. Several cardboard boxes had collapsed with age, and folded blankets occupied a wooden shelf. Nothing looked valuable. Nothing looked dangerous. It simply looked forgotten. Scout entered first, sniffing beneath the desk. "So much for buried treasure," Mara said. Elias did not answer. He was studying the room with an expression she couldn't read. Mara brushed dust from the desk. Beneath it lay a large book bound in dark, cracked leather. She lifted it carefully. Gold lettering, almost completely worn away. Read Briarwood Guest Ledger. Guest records. Mara opened it. The first pages were ordinary. Dates, names, room numbers, payment amounts written neatly beside each entry. She turned forward several years. The format changed. Names still filled the pages, sometimes entire families, but room numbers disappeared. So did prices. Instead, short notes appeared beside certain entries. Safe. Mara turned another page. Paid forward. Again. Safe. Again. Paid forward. "What does that mean?" she asked. Elias leaned over her shoulder. "I don't know." Mara continued through the pages. The handwriting changed across the years, but the strange words remained. Some entries listed adults with children. Others contained only a surname and a date. She stopped when Elias suddenly caught her wrist. "Wait." His voice had changed. Mara followed his gaze to a name halfway down the page. Elias stared at it without blinking. His face had gone pale beneath his weathered skin. "You know that person?" Mara asked. He slowly took the ledger from her hands, looked at the entry again, then closed the book as if he no longer wanted to see it. Mara waited. Finally, Elias looked at her. "My mother." Elias kept one hand on the closed ledger, as though opening it again might change what he had seen. Mara waited beside him in the hidden room while Scout sniffed through the dust near the filing cabinets. "Your mother stayed here?" she finally asked. Elias nodded slowly. "Her name was Margaret Boone. Same spelling, same middle initial." He opened the ledger again and found the entry. Beside Margaret's name was a date from the winter of 1983 and one word: safe. "Did she ever tell you about Briarwood?" Mara asked. "Not exactly." Elias sat on the edge of the old desk. "She talked about one winter when things got bad. My father's work disappeared. We moved around for a while. I was young enough that most of its pieces. But you remember this place?" "I remember coming here later." Not staying here. He stared at the page. She never said we needed somewhere to sleep. Mara understood the hesitation in his voice. There were some parts of being poor people learned to describe without ever naming them. She closed the ledger carefully. Maybe someone in town knows what these entries mean. Elias suggested the Silver Pine Library. By late morning, Mara drove there with the ledger wrapped in one of Helen's old blankets to protect it. The library occupied a brick building beside the town hall. Nora Vega, the woman working behind the reference desk, listened without interrupting as Mara explained where they had found the book. Nora was 42, with dark hair pinned loosely behind her head, and the alert expression of someone who liked questions more than answers. Briarwood records, she said. That could be useful. Most of what we have is newspaper material and county filings. She led Mara to a small archive room in the back. Elias joined them after parking his truck. Nora began matching dates from the ledger to old newspapers. Within an hour, patterns appeared. In January 1983, a timber operation outside Silver Pine had closed unexpectedly, leaving dozens without work. Several surnames from that month appeared in the ledger. Another cluster followed an apartment fire years later. A third coincided with a winter when unemployment in the county had risen sharply. These don't look like tourists, Nora said. Mara ran her finger down a page filled with family names. Then what were they? Nora didn't answer. She simply pulled another archive box closer, while Elias searched newspapers. Mara and Nora worked through town records. Their conversation drifted from Briarwood to Mara herself. So you moved up here to reopen it? Nora asked. Mara almost said yes. The lie would have been easier. I moved up here because yesterday morning I got kicked out of a motel. Nora looked at her, but there was no pity in her face. And then you inherited an inn. A ruined one. Still strange timing. Mara gave a short laugh. That's one way to put it. Nora returned to the records without offering advice, and Mara was unexpectedly grateful. By mid-afternoon, Mara drove back to Briarwood with Elias. They had barely entered when a sharp cracking sound came from the kitchen wall. Water began spilling beneath the sink. Shut off, Elias said. They scrambled into the utility area and closed the main valve, but not before water had spread across the kitchen floor. A pipe had split where the cold had reached it. Elias helped identify what Mara needed, and she drove into town for fittings. And a short section of replacement pipe. At the register, she watched nearly all the money she had left disappear. The $10 for Briarwood suddenly seemed insignificant. When she returned, a dark SUV was waiting outside. Cal Mercer stood beside it. Heard you're already buying plumbing supplies, he said. Small town. Mara carried the bag toward the porch. Apparently, my offer's still open. He named a figure slightly higher than before. Enough to make her stop. Why more? Because I'd rather settle it before the storm, and before this place drains whatever cash you have left. Mara looked at the sagging gutter and the boarded windows. For one dangerous second, the offer felt less like surrender and more like escape. Then she remembered Helen's note. Learn what it was. Not yet, she said. Cal studied her, then nodded once. Weather won't wait for you to decide. After he left, Mara and Elias repaired the damaged section as best they could. Near sunset, Nora called. Her voice carried a new urgency. I found something you need to see. Mara returned to the library before closing. Nora had spread county business records across a table. She pointed to several years. According to official filings, Briarwood was closed for the winter during these periods. No regular lodging operations. Mara opened the ledger to the matching dates. Names filled page after page. Families, children, safe, paid forward. She looked at Nora. But these people were here. Nora nodded. Mara stared at the entries, feeling the mystery deepen instead of narrow. If Briarwood had officially been closed, why had dozens of families still been coming through its doors? The next morning, Mara spread the ledger across the front desk while Elias worked nearby with a flashlight and a box of tools. The repaired pipe was holding, but the inn remained bitterly cold. Outside, clouds had settled low over the mountains, turning the windows gray. Mara compared the dates Nora had copied from the county records with the entries in front of her. The pattern was impossible to ignore. During winters when Briarwood was officially closed, people had still arrived. Not couples on vacation or travelers passing through. Families. Sometimes 4 or 5 people shared one entry. "Look at this," Mara said. Elias leaned over. Beside several names, instead of safe or paid forward, someone had written worked. Under one family was a smaller note, roof repair. Another said kitchen. A third read firewood. They worked for their rooms. Mara asked, "Maybe," Elias turned back several pages, "or helped because they were here." More examples appeared. One man had repaired windows. A woman had cooked for 2 weeks. Another entry mentioned childcare. There were no payment amounts beside any of them. Mara pictured the inn during those winters not dark and abandoned as it was now, but filled with people doing whatever they could. Someone splitting logs outside. Someone stirring a pot in the kitchen. Children waiting near the fireplace. She walked into the lobby and looked at the covered furniture differently. Yesterday she had seen only damage. Now she imagined people who might once have been grateful simply to close a door against the cold. The thought stayed with her because she knew exactly what one locked door could mean. 2 mornings ago, she had stood outside a motel with nowhere to go. She had been measuring her life in gallons of gas and nights she could no longer afford. "They weren't customers," she said quietly. Elias looked at the ledger. "Doesn't seem like it." Then what was Briarwood doing? Before he could answer, Mara's phone sounded with a weather alert. The storm had strengthened. Heavy snowfall was expected by evening, with blizzard conditions developing across higher roads. Elias read the warning over her shoulder. "You should think seriously about getting down the mountain before that arrives." Mara looked around the lobby. "And go where?" He had no quick answer. Tires crunched outside shortly afterward. Mara already knew who it was before Cal Mercer stepped through the front door. He brushed snow from his coat and glanced at the buckets positioned beneath 2 leaks. "Forecast changed," he said. "I heard. Then I'll make this simple." He gave her a final offer for Briarwood, higher than his first 2. "Take it today. I handle the property from here. You leave before the road gets bad." Mara stared at the figure. It could buy time. Rent, repairs to her car, a chance to stop calculating whether she could afford breakfast. "This building needs more money than you have," Cal said. The words hurt because they were true. "After this storm, it may need even more." Mara looked toward the hidden pantry door. "Why do you want it?" "The land has value, and the inn," Cal glanced around. "Not enough." Mara thought about the ledger and the families who had entered this building during winters when official records claimed it was closed. Whatever Briarwood had been, she still did not understand it. Selling now would mean never learning. "No," she said. Cal's expression tightened slightly. "You sure?" "No, but I'm not selling today." He left without arguing. By afternoon, snow had begun falling steadily. Mara and Elias moved anything vulnerable away from the worst leaks, checked the downstairs windows, and brought several boxes from the hidden room into safer positions. Scout followed them back and forth until he suddenly stopped beside the lowest shelf.
He pushed his nose beneath a folded stack of old blankets. Scout, leave it. Instead, he pulled backward. A blanket slid to the floor, dragging another with it. Something fluttered down behind them.
Mara bent and retrieved a yellowed envelope wedged between the shelf and the wall. Dust coated its edges. The handwriting on the front was faded but still readable. For Claire. Mara stopped breathing for a moment. Elias noticed her expression. "What is it?" She didn't answer. Her fingers traced the name. Claire was not unusual enough to prove anything by itself. But the handwriting felt suddenly personal, because there was only one Claire Mara could think about. Her mother. Claire Ellison had died only months ago without ever telling Mara that Briarwood meant anything to her. Mara turned the envelope over. It was sealed. "My mother's name was Claire," she said. Elias looked from her to the envelope. Could be someone else. Could be. Mara wanted that to feel reassuring. It didn't. She looked toward the ledger on the desk, then back at the envelope that had been hidden for years inside a room no one was supposed to know existed. Her mother had sent Christmas cards to Helen. Mara had assumed that was the extent of their connection. Now, with snow thickening outside and the old inn closing around her, that assumption suddenly felt fragile. She held the envelope beneath the flashlight and stared again at the two words written across its face. For Claire. Mara stood in the hidden room with the envelope in both hands while snow tapped harder against the boarded windows beyond the pantry. Elias waited near the doorway, giving her space without pretending not to be curious. Scout sat beside her boots, watching her face. The seal broke with almost no resistance. Inside was a single folded sheet, yellowed along the edges. Mara recognized her mother's handwriting before she read the first word. Helen. Thank you for that winter. Mara stopped. She read the line again, slower. Thank you for letting us stay when I had nowhere else to take her. Thank you for never making me explain more than I could. I found work. We'll be leaving soon. Please don't tell Mara about any of this when she's older. I want her to remember that time differently. I don't want her growing up believing we were something people had to rescue. Mara lowered the page. Us, she said. Elias didn't move. She wrote us. She forced herself to continue. There were only a few more lines. Claire thanked Helen again, promised to repay the kindness someday, and asked that whatever records existed remain private. Nothing explained where they had been before Briarwood, how long they stayed, or why Mara remembered none of it. That absence made Mara angrier than a complete answer might have. She lied to me. Elias leaned against the wall. Maybe she thought she was protecting you. From what? Knowing we were poor, Mara laughed once, without humor. I already knew that. Knowing you had nowhere to live might have felt different. Mara folded the letter too sharply, then immediately smoothed it out. Did Helen ever talk to you about this? About my mother? No. You knew this place? You knew Helen? You knew people came through here? I knew Briarwood was important to her. That's not the same as knowing everyone who slept under its roof. Your own mother is in that ledger, and I found that out yesterday. His voice remained calm, but the words stopped Mara. Elias looked toward the shelves of old records. Helen believed people had a right to keep the worst parts of their lives to themselves. If she promised Claire she wouldn't talk, she wouldn't have talked to me either. Mara wanted someone to blame because blame was easier than sitting with the possibility that her mother had once been as frightened and desperate as Mara was now. Her phone rang before she could answer. Nora's name appeared on the screen. Mara stepped into the lobby where reception was slightly stronger. I found more references, Nora said. Nothing definitive yet, but Claire Ellison appears in an old address record around the right years. Then there's a gap before the next listed residence. Mara looked back toward the pantry. I found a letter from her. Silence. Your mother, she stayed here. Saying it aloud made it real. With me, apparently. Nora's voice softened but did not become pitying. Do you know when? Not yet. I can keep checking. Outside. The wind suddenly pushed snow sideways across the windows. Nora added, The storm's moving faster. If you're planning to come down, do it now. Mara ended the call and found Elias already pulling on his coat. She's right, he said. We should leave before the road closes. Mara looked at the failing lights overhead, the buckets beneath the leaks, and the building she had owned for only days. She did not want to abandon it, but she also did not want to become trapped because stubbornness felt more dignified than fear. Fine, she said. We go. She packed the ledger, Claire's letter, Scout's food, and the few belongings she had brought inside. Elias led in his truck while Mara followed slowly in the sedan. Snow erased the road edges almost as quickly as tires made tracks. They had gone less than a mile when Elias's brake lights flared. Mara stopped behind him. A pine had fallen across the road, its trunk buried beneath fresh snow, branches reaching from ditch to ditch. Elias climbed out and examined it. Mara joined him, pulling her coat tight against the wind. Can we move it? She shouted. He shook his head. Not without equipment we don't have. The road behind them was already disappearing beneath blowing snow. Returning to Briarwood was the only safe choice. By the time they reached the inn again, the lights were dead. Elias checked the panel, then shook his head. Power's gone. They lit flashlights and an old camping lantern from his trunk. Mara wrapped herself in layers and sat at the front desk with the ledger while Elias checked windows downstairs. She could not stop thinking about Claire's words. I had nowhere else to take her. Mara turned pages slowly, searching the year indicated by the letter. The entries became denser as winter deepened. Families, couples, children. Safe, worked, paid forward. Then she saw the name Claire Ellison, 2 persons. Mara's pulse jumped. Beneath it, in smaller handwriting, was a second entry. Child age 4. She stared at the date and counted backward automatically. 30 years. She had been 4. The second person was not a stranger, not another relative, not someone whose name had been forgotten. It was her. Mara kept staring at the entry until the words began to blur. Claire Ellison, 2 persons, child age 4. The lantern flickered beside the ledger, throwing shadows across the front desk. Scout rested his chin on her knee, but Mara barely noticed. For years, she had carried a version of her childhood built from fragments her mother had chosen to keep. Cheap apartments, hand-me-down clothes, meals stretched carefully to the end of the week. There had always been struggle, but in Mara's memory there had also always been a home. Now a single line of ink had torn a hole through that certainty. I was here, she said. Elias stood across the lobby, silent. My mother brought me here because we had nowhere else. He nodded once. Mara looked around the dark room. Something stirred at the edge of memory. Not an image exactly, a sound. Wood creaking under running feet, then the faint smell of cinnamon. She closed her eyes. Another piece surfaced, a carved wooden horse near a staircase, its paint worn smooth along the back. There was a toy, she said. A little horse. Elias glanced toward the covered furniture. Could have been. Mara stood too quickly, took the lantern, and crossed the lobby. Beneath an old sheet beside the staircase was a small bench and, tucked underneath it, something wooden. She pulled it out. A child's rocking horse, dusty and chipped, but unmistakable. Mara touched the curved neck. Her throat tightened. I remember this. The realization did not comfort her. It made the room feel closer. She could suddenly imagine Claire arriving with a 4-year-old child and no place to sleep. Mara had spent the last few months ashamed of every unpaid bill, every night in the motel, every moment she had needed help. Now she wondered how much of that shame had been inherited from a story her mother had tried to erase. She didn't want me to know, Mara said. Maybe because she didn't want you carrying what she carried. Elias lowered himself into a chair nearby. My mother was the same way. He looked toward the hidden room. She told me my father had a slow season. That was all. Never said we were broke enough to need a place like this. Were you? Looks like it. He paused. And I spent most of my life thinking we'd handled everything ourselves. Mara looked at him, for the first time since they met. Elias seemed less like the man who knew every damaged beam in Briarwood, and more like someone whose past had just shifted beneath him too. The wind hit the building hard enough to rattle the windows. Somewhere upstairs, something thumped. Elias stood. Roof. Water had begun leaking through the west side faster than before. Mara and Elias carried buckets upstairs and found a dark stain spreading across the ceiling near 2 guest rooms. Snow had forced water beneath damaged shingles. They moved old furniture away from the wet area and laid towels along the floor. Mara's hands went numb despite her gloves. If this keeps up, we'll lose part of the ceiling, Elias said. What can we do? Keep the weight off. Protect what matters. Mara immediately thought of the hidden room. They hurried downstairs. Moisture had not reached it yet, but one section of wall near the pantry was damp. Together they began moving boxes and records into the drier lobby. Scout followed, weaving between their legs as if determined to supervise. Mara's phone briefly caught a signal. A message from Nora appeared, followed by a call that broke in and out. I confirmed more names. Nora said through static, some of the families in the ledger stayed in Silver Pine after those winters. A few are still around the region. So they were real. Definitely. And not tourists. The connection cracked. Nora, can you hear me? Barely. I'll keep. The call died. Mara looked at the phone until the no service symbol returned. She set it aside and continued carrying records. One box had softened from age and split at the bottom when she lifted it. Papers slid across the floor. Scout nosed among them, then tugged at the leather ledger lying nearby. Leave it, Mara said. As she reached for the book, she noticed the inside of its back cover had pulled away slightly from the binding. A thin pocket had been sewn into the leather. She worked 2 fingers beneath it and drew out a folded sheet of paper. Elias came closer. What is it, Mara? Opened the sheet carefully. It contained a list of names and addresses, some crossed out, others updated in different handwriting. At the top, Helen had written a short instruction, ask them what they remember. Mara read the names slowly. Several matched entries they had already seen. These weren't anonymous records anymore. They were people Helen expected someone to find. Some of them could still be alive. Mara said. Elias nodded. Looks like that was the point. Mara moved down the list until she reached the first name with a current-looking Silver Pine address. She stopped. She read it twice to make sure exhaustion had not changed the letters. It was someone she already knew. Someone who had stood in this lobby and spoken about Briarwood as though it were nothing but failing timber and valuable land. Mara turned the page toward Elias. His expression hardened slightly when he saw the name at the top of Helen's list, written beside an address in Silver Pine. Was Cal Mercer? By morning, the storm had swallowed the mountain. Mara stood near the lobby window holding Helen's list while snow drove sideways beyond the glass. There was no question of reaching Silver Pine now. But shortly after 9, her phone caught enough signal for one call. Cal answered on the third ring. "Did you ever stay at Briarwood?" Mara asked. Silence followed. "What are you talking about? Your name is in Helen's records." Another pause, longer this time. "Where did you find that?" "A guest ledger." Cal exhaled sharply. "Mara. Some records are better left alone. Why? Because not everyone wants the worst year of their life turned into local history." The bitterness in his voice surprised her. Mara looked at Elias, who was listening nearby. "Your family stayed here." "My father lost his job when I was 9. We lost our house a few months later." Cal spoke quickly now, as if speed could make the memory smaller. "Helen gave us rooms until he found work. Nobody called it charity. Nobody talked about it afterward." Mara tightened her grip on the phone. "That's why you never mentioned it. I spent years making sure nobody looked at me and saw that kid. And now you want Briarwood demolished." "I want the land. That's business." His voice softened slightly. "But I won't pretend I'm sentimental about the building." Mara thought about her own anger after finding Claire's letter. "Why?" Cal answered quietly. "Some of us spent our whole lives trying not to be the people in that book." The connection died moments later. Mara remained beside the window. Cal's words had landed too close to something she recognized. She had spent months hiding overdue bills and pretending motel rooms were temporary choices. She had even joked with Scout while being evicted because admitting she needed help felt worse than sleeping in a car. Elias watched her. "You all right?" "I think I understand him more than I wanted to." By afternoon, the blizzard intensified. Snow piled against the porch steps. Elias rationed the lantern fuel while Mara counted what food remained. Crackers, canned soup, bread, Scout's food, and a few things Elias had brought in his truck. Enough if they were careful. Barely. Near dusk, Scout suddenly barked toward the front entrance. Mara heard nothing at first, then came pounding. 3 weak blows against the door. She and Elias exchanged a look. Mara opened it against the wind. A man stood outside with snow crusted across his coat. Behind him was a woman carrying a young girl wrapped in a blanket. "Our car slid off the road," he shouted. "It's down the mountain. We saw the building." The child was trembling violently. Mara moved aside immediately. "Get in." They stumbled into the lobby. Elias closed the door and helped the man remove his wet outer layer. Mara wrapped another blanket around the girl, while Scout sat close without touching her. "Are you open?" the woman asked. Mara almost laughed at the absurdity of the question. "Buckets caught roof leaks. The power was dead. Half the rooms were unusable." "Not exactly." The parents exchanged a frightened glance. "We can pay something," the man said. Mara thought of the food she had counted. Every additional person meant less heat, less water, less of everything. She also remembered herself standing outside the motel 2 mornings earlier, asking for only a few more hours. "Don't worry about that," she said. Elias helped choose a downstairs room away from the damaged west side. Mara carried blankets while the family settled their daughter beneath them. The girl's shaking gradually eased. Her mother kept thanking Mara until Mara finally said, "You don't have to keep doing that." Back in the hallway, Elias gave her a quiet look. What Mara asked? Nothing. That wasn't nothing. "You made the decision pretty fast." Mara glanced toward the room. "There's a blizzard outside." "Exactly." He walked toward the lobby before she could answer. "Later." Mara prepared canned soup on a small camping stove Elias had brought from his trunk. She divided it among 5 bowls, making her own portion smaller without mentioning it. The family ate near the front desk beneath blankets. For the first time since Mara arrived, Briarwood sounded occupied. Quiet conversation replaced the wind for a while. A child's tired laugh rose near the staircase. Mara found herself looking at the rocking horse she had remembered from 30 years ago. After dinner, she went to prepare another room so the parents would not have to sleep upright beside their daughter. Scout followed her. The room smelled of dust, but it was dry. Mara wiped the old door with a cloth and noticed shallow scratches beneath several layers of faded paint. She held the lantern closer. They were not random marks. Someone had carved words into the wood long ago. She rubbed away more dust until the sentence became readable. "No one sleeps outside if we have a bed." Mara stood motionless. Behind her, the inn creaked under the weight of the storm. Down the hallway, the stranded family spoke softly in the room she had given them. She thought of Margaret Boone, Cal's family, Claire, herself. All those names without room numbers or payments. Safe, paid forward, worked. Mara touched the carved words with her fingertips. She had been asking why Briarwood accepted guests during winters when it was officially closed. Now, for the first time, she understood that she might have been asking the wrong question. Briarwood had never been only an inn. By morning, the wind had weakened enough for the silence to feel strange. Snow still covered the lower half of the windows, but the blizzard had passed. The stranded family remained downstairs while Elias cleared the porch, and Mara sat at the front desk with the ledger. Claire's letter and Helen's list spread before her. For the first time, the pieces no longer looked separate. Nora called as soon as cell service returned. She had spent the storm comparing names from the ledger with archived newspapers, property records, and old community notices. "You were right about the pattern," she said. "Most of those people weren't travelers. Some had lost homes to fires, others had been displaced after layoffs or evictions. Several families appeared in public records at new addresses weeks or months after their names appeared at Briarwood. During the gap, the inn had apparently been their home." Elias sat opposite Mara and listened. "What about the years Briarwood was officially closed?" he asked. "That's the point," Nora replied. "It wasn't operating as a regular business during those winters. But that doesn't mean Helen's family stopped letting people stay." Mara looked toward the words carved into the guest room door. "No one sleeps outside if we have a bed." The ledger suddenly made sense. Safe meant someone had been given shelter. Worked recorded the people who contributed what they could: cooking, repairs, firewood, childcare. Paid forward was not a bill, it was a promise. Nora contacted several people whose names appeared on Helen's list. Their memories differed in detail but not in meaning. Briarwood had quietly taken in families who had nowhere else to go. No advertisements, no public shelter designation, no requirement that people explain their worst moments to strangers. Paying guests during stronger seasons helped support the inn, and the Ellison family covered what remained. Helen had continued the practice for as long as she could. "Why hide the ledger?" Mara asked. Nora was quiet for a moment. "From what people told me, Helen believed privacy was part of the help." Elias nodded. "Sounds like her." Mara thought of Cal. He had spent decades trying to escape the identity of the frightened 9-year-old whose family needed a room. Publicizing those names would have turned Helen's kindness into something else. The hidden room had protected the people inside the ledger as much as it preserved their stories. After the stranded family safely left with assistance from town, Mara returned to Claire's entry. She no longer needed to guess what it meant. 30 years earlier, Claire had lost her housing while raising a 4-year-old daughter. With nowhere else to go, she had brought Mara to Briarwood. Helen had given them a room. They stayed while Claire searched for work, and when she found it, they moved on. Mara remembered almost none of the hardship because Claire had wanted it that way. What remained in her memory was cinnamon, wooden stairs, and a rocking horse. Safety rather than fear, Mara pressed her palm against the page. I was angry at her for hiding it. Elias stood beside her. Still angry, I don't know. Mara swallowed. I spent months thinking needing help meant I'd failed at something everyone else knew how to do. She looked around the battered lobby, and my mother probably thought exactly the same thing. Claire had asked Helen to keep the truth secret because she did not want Mara growing up believing they had been people who needed rescuing. But the ledger told a gentler story. Needing a room had not defined Claire. It had simply been one chapter between losing a home and finding another. Mara carefully turned toward the final pages. Most were blank. Near the back, however, she found a page folded against the binding. Her name was written across the top in Helen's unmistakable hand. Mara Ellison. Her chest tightened. Beneath it was a short note. Mara read slowly. Helen wrote that Briarwood had never survived because its walls were strong. It survived because, whenever someone arrived with nowhere to go, somebody inside chose to open the door. She wrote that Claire had eventually rebuilt her life and fiercely protected Mara from the shame she carried from that winter. Helen had respected that promise. Mara stopped reading and wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. Elias quietly moved toward the window, leaving her alone with the page. Helen's final lines continued below. Mara, if this book has reached you, then you have learned what your mother wanted hidden, and what I promised to protect. Do not judge her for being afraid. Do not judge yourself for ever needing what she needed. A bed is only a bed until someone has nowhere else to sleep. A door is only a door until someone chooses to open it. Mara looked toward Scout, curled beneath the desk where the old ledger rested. Only days earlier, she had been standing outside a motel carrying everything she owned. She had believed inheriting Briarwood was an absurd accident, a $10 ruin arriving at the worst possible moment. Her eyes returned to Helen's handwriting. One final sentence remained at the bottom of the page. Mara read it once, then again, as the full meaning settled over her. If you are reading this, Briarwood has sheltered you twice. Mara read Helen's final sentence until the words stopped feeling like ink and became something heavier. Briarwood has sheltered you twice. The first time she had been 4 years old, carried through these doors by a frightened mother who had nowhere else to go. The second time she had arrived 30 years later with a failing car, 2 bags, a dog, and barely enough money to buy another night indoors. Helen could not have known the exact morning Mara would be evicted from a motel. But she had known Claire was gone. She had known Mara was struggling, and she had left Briarwood to the one person who had already been protected by it once. Mara folded the note carefully and sat alone behind the old front desk while Scout rested against her boots. She had spent days thinking the inheritance was either luck or a burden. Now she understood it was neither. It was a responsibility, though not the kind she had expected. The roof still leaked. The pipes still threatened to freeze. Half the upstairs rooms needed repairs she could not afford. Knowing what Briarwood had been did not magically make Mara capable of saving it. That reality became clear as soon as Elias returned from inspecting the west side. "We can stabilize it," he said, "but not with what you've got." Mara looked at the ledger. "Then I need help." The words came out reluctantly. Elias raised an eyebrow. Mara almost laughed. "I know. Apparently that's the lesson. Over the next several weeks, Nora contacted the people on Helen's list carefully. She never shared the ledger publicly and never treated the names as a story for the town to gossip about. She simply told people that Briarwood needed repairs and that Helen's records suggested some families might remember the place. The first response came from an elderly woman whose parents had stayed there after an apartment fire. She offered money for lumber. A roofer from another county recognized his grandfather's name and offered 3 days of labor. An electrician volunteered to replace damaged wiring in the downstairs rooms. Small checks arrived with short notes for Helen. For winter. Paid forward. Mara read every one. Some were only $20. One envelope contained 15. She understood those gifts better than large ones. Elias repaired windows and rebuilt sections of trim that had rotted beneath the snow. Nora spent evenings cataloging records without exposing the people named inside them. Even Cal returned one afternoon. Mara saw his SUV and braced herself for another offer to buy. Instead, he stood in the lobby with his hands in his coat pockets. "I'm withdrawing the offer," he said. "Why?" "Because I know you're not selling." He looked toward the staircase. "And because my parents would probably haunt me if I helped tear this place down." Mara smiled faintly. Cal did not. He handed her an envelope. Inside was enough to repair one downstairs guest room. "That's not for you," he said. "It's for them. Your parents." He nodded. "Don't put their names on anything." "I won't." That was as close to peace as they needed. Briarwood did not become beautiful overnight. Mara learned quickly that restoration was mostly unglamorous work. Invoices, cold fingers, sanding, hauling debris, patching plaster, and deciding which repair had to wait. Some days she still woke afraid that one broken furnace or unpaid bill would end everything. But she no longer hid those fears, as though needing help made her unfit to own the place. By spring, several rooms were usable. By summer, Briarwood reopened as a small inn. Paying guests occupied the restored rooms during hiking season, and the money helped cover maintenance. Mara kept a few rooms unavailable for reservations. She did not advertise them. She simply kept them ready. Elias restored the old wooden sign and carried it to the porch one clear afternoon. Briarwood Inn had been carved deeply into the board beneath it. Mara added a smaller line herself. "No one sleeps outside if we have a bed." Elias read it and nodded once. Helen would have liked that. Mara looked at the building behind them. I think she already did. The following winter came early. Snow covered Silver Pine before December, and Briarwood's windows glowed warmly against the mountainside. One evening, an old sedan pulled into the drive just before dark. Mara watched from behind the front desk as a young woman stepped out with a little girl. Their coats were too thin for the weather. The woman entered holding the child's hand and glanced around the lobby with the nervous politeness Mara recognized immediately. "Do you have a room?" she asked. "We do." "How much for one night?" Mara noticed the woman already reaching into a worn wallet. There were only a few bills inside. For a moment, Mara saw herself in the motel doorway, bargaining for a few more hours. She saw Claire carrying a 4-year-old daughter into Briarwood 30 years earlier. She saw every name in the old ledger reduced to one terrible question. Can I afford to be safe tonight? Mara took a key from beneath the desk and slid it across the counter. Tonight, nothing. The woman stared at her. I can pay something. You don't need to. Her eyes filled, but Mara did not make her explain. She only told her where the room was and where breakfast would be in the morning. After mother and daughter went upstairs, Mara entered the hidden room. It was no longer hidden now. The doorway remained uncovered. though the old ledger was protected inside a simple glass case. The names within it remained private. Beside the case sat a new ledger. Mara opened it to a blank page. Scout settled beside her feet, older and calmer, but still watching every movement. Mara wrote the date, then the woman's name. She left the payment column empty. For a moment, her pen hovered over the page. Outside, snow fell steadily across Colorado, softening the road and covering the repaired roof. From upstairs came the faint sound of a child laughing. Mara thought about how long she had believed survival meant never needing anyone. Briarwood had taught her something different. Sometimes survival meant someone opening a door. Sometimes dignity meant accepting the room without being forced to explain why you needed it. And sometimes the only repayment that mattered was leaving the door open for whoever came next. Mara lowered the pen and wrote one word beside the new name. Safe.